Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through 125 wild facts about the armor of Oblivion, the steel and sorcery that kept adventurers alive during the greatest crisis Tamriel has ever known. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. Forged in Oblivion's fire. Daedric armor is not simply the finest heavy armor in the game. It is, according to Elder Scrolls lore, an entirely different category of creation altogether. Mortals did not design Daedric equipment. They stumbled upon its secrets, or perhaps the secrets were allowed to be found. The process, as it has been pieced together across generations of smiths, scholars, and whispered manuscript traditions, involves binding raw ebony, the rarest metal in Tamriel, with the essence of a Daedric entity. The heart of a Daedra is thrown into the forge fire at precisely the right moment, and something changes. Something that has no purely physical explanation takes hold. The armor that emerges is no longer just shaped metal. It carries within it a trace of whatever the Daedra was, its aggression, its hunger, its alien permanence. In the Third Era, as the Oblivion crisis consumed Cyrodiil, Daedric armor began appearing with unsettling frequency, stripped from the bodies of Dremora and harvested from the chaos flooding through open gates. The red glow in darkness. One of the strangest and most beautiful properties of Daedric armor is one that most players discover by accident and only at night. Daedric armor glows, not in the subtle way enchanted items pulse or shimmer, but a deep, unsettling red, a dim crimson luminescence that bleeds from the joints and plates of the armor in the dark hours. The glow is a genuine in-game effect, visible without any enchantment, entirely passive. The most widely held interpretation within the lore is that this is a residual property of the Daedra heart used in the forging, a faint trace of the creature whose essence is now locked inside the metal, still radiating whatever it was in life. Whether that is truly what causes it, or whether the glow is simply an emergent property of ebony alloyed with something fundamentally not of this world, is a question the lore leaves open. What is not debated is the result. Put on a full set of Daedric and stand somewhere dark at night. That red light is not a glitch. It is the armor doing something that regular metal simply does not. Secrets of the Ebony Forge. The process of making ebony armor is not simply a matter of melting ore and pouring it into a mold. Ebony is refined, then folded, repeatedly hammered back upon itself, layered and compacted. The process draws on techniques that would be recognizable to real-world metal workers as something close to forging pattern-welded steel, except that the material responds to this treatment in ways that have no natural explanation. Ebony armor created this way becomes not just dense, but internally coherent. Each fold integrates the material in a way that distributes impact stress across the entire piece, rather than concentrating it at a point. In game terms, this is reflected in the armor's durability. Ebony is the last tier before Daedric, and in the world of Cyrodiil during the Oblivion crisis, a complete set of ebony armor was something that could take an entire adventuring career to assemble. Even at level 15, when the leveled lists begin populating the world with ebony pieces, they are rare, expensive, and commanding. Glass is not glass. Perhaps no single piece of Elder Scrolls nomenclature confuses new players more thoroughly than the word glass as a material. In Cyrodiil and across Tamriel, glass armor is the strongest form of light armor available. It is also strikingly beautiful. A deep green, almost luminescent, catching light in ways that plate steel simply does not. But it isn't made from the glass you find in windows. It has nothing to do with silica, nothing to do with melting sand. The material is malachite, a rare volcanic milky translucent green crystal that, under the right conditions, absorbs and channels magical energy. Malachite is found predominantly on the volcanic island of Vardenfell, though ore veins scatter across the wider continent. It bears no relation to the copper ore of the same name that exists in the real world, beyond sharing a green-blue hue. In Tamriel, malachite is a hard stone, much harder than window glass, with a far higher melting point, and the name glass simply stuck because of how the finished product looks. Dunmer mastery and the art of absorption. Glass armor did not develop in isolation. It is, according to the lore texts available in-game, the pinnacle of Dunmeri light armor design, created and refined by the Dark Elves over centuries. The Dunmer took their inspiration from High Elven ornate armors, which prioritized elegant craft over brute protection. But where the Altmer often leaned into aesthetics, the Dunmer transformed the form into something functional at an elite level. Malachite is studied into the armor's construction in specific places, not as decoration, but as engineering. The crystalline material absorbs shock and redistributes it through the piece in a way that far exceeds what steel can manage, despite weighing significantly less. This is the key design principle. Glass armor is not trying to stop a blow by being thicker than the blow. It is trying to redirect the energy of the blow away from the wearer. The result is a suit that, at maximum light armor skill, approaches the protection of Daedric itself. The Grey Fox and his stolen crown. The grey cowl of Nocturnal is possibly the most lore-laden piece of headgear in all of Oblivion. According to the story told across the Thieves' Guild questline, the grey cowl was stolen from Nocturnal herself, the Daedric Prince of Darkness and Night, more than 300 years before the events of the game. Whoever wears the cowl takes on an extraordinary property. Their entire identity is replaced. Their name, their reputation, their fame, their infamy, their active bounties. All of it becomes the identity of the Grey Fox. The player character, when wearing the cowl, ceases to exist as themselves. They become the Grey Fox. The guards who chase them are chasing the Grey Fox, not the hero of Kvatch. The bounties they accrue attach to the Grey Fox, and when the cowl is removed, all of that simply falls away. It is one of the cleverest implementations of a lore mechanic in any Elder Scrolls game, using the game's own systems to tell the story of what the item actually is. The helmet sitting on bones at the bottom of the sea, off the western coast of Cyrodiil, past the city of Anvil, and out into the Abetian Sea, there is a small island. On the island, there is a single distinctive rock, and off the western slope of that island, down beneath the surface of the water, resting on the sea floor next to a human skeleton and a pair of large boulders, is Fin Gleam. Fin Gleam is a unique glass helmet, visually nearly identical to a standard glass helmet, though with slightly less armor rating. And it is available from the very first moment the player walks out of the sewers at the start of the game. No enemies guard it. No dungeon must be cleared. The only obstacle between the player and Fin Gleam is the water itself. The helmet is enchanted with Night Eye and Detect Life, as well as water breathing, an enchantment that makes swimming out to find it dramatically easier once you already have it, which is the game's little joke at the player's expense. Whose bones are those at the bottom of the sea? No one in the game ever answers that question. The armor that replaced an identity. In the Ayleid ruin of Vindasal, southwest of the Imperial City, there is a warrior named Umbra. She is a Bosmer, a wood elf, and she is wearing a set of custom ebony armor. But Umbra is not a person anymore, not exactly. Her real name was Lenwyn. She was an apprentice under a weapons master in the nearby village of Pell's Gate, until she found the sword, the artifact known as Umbra, and everything changed. The sword's need for souls drove her to become bloodthirsty, to seek out fights, to rename herself after the blade that was consuming her. Eventually, even the mercenary work became too much. She retreated to Vindicel and simply waits, not hostile unless provoked, waiting for someone worthy enough to end it. Her armor, Umbra's ebony armor, is leveled and unusual. Below level 15, it is equivalent to orcish armor in its stats, rather than true ebony, reflecting the way the game's world distributes her equipment independently of the standard loot tables. At level 15 and above, it becomes standard ebony in all respects. A warrior whose identity was swallowed by a sword, wearing armor that doesn't quite match what it looks like. There is something fitting about both facts. The mask that cost you a sword, Clavicus Vile, Daedric Prince of Deals and Wishes and the Corruption of Desire, offers the player one of the most interesting moral choices in the game disguised as a simple fetch quest. His artifact is the Mask of Clavicus Vile, a heavy helmet that grants 20 points of personality, making the wearer more persuasive, more likable, harder to refuse in conversation and commerce. But to get the mask, the player must give up the Umbra sword, one of the most powerful weapons in the entire game, with the highest base damage of any longsword available. The choice is pointed and deliberate. You can keep the sword, a weapon that exists to fight, and walk away with nothing from Vile. Or you can give the sword to a prince who clearly wants it for his own reasons and receive a helmet that makes you better at talking to people. The mask is Clavicus Vile's comment on what power is actually for. Hircine's hide and the name that implies a dark process. The Savior's hide is a Daedric artifact, a light armor cuirass obtained by completing Hircine's quest, which requires the player to hunt the only unicorn in Cyrodiil and offer its horn at the shrine. The hide grants a 25% resistance to magic, making it one of the most practically useful artifact items in the game for any build that regularly faces spellcasters. But the name is unsettling when you sit with it. A hide. Not a cuirass crafted from metal, but a hide, the term used for cured animal skin. Lore texts associated with Hircine describe the artifact as something born from the act of the hunt itself, and the word Savior has always invited a grim reading. What if the one saved was not the wearer, but Hircine himself, receiving the pelt? Martin Septim, when he encounters this and other Daedric artifacts, notes that the bestial nature of some Daedric princes seems impossible to conceal. Whether that's a commentary on what the armor is made from, or simply on the prince who offered it as a reward, is left to the imagination. Hircine is, after all, the prince of the hunt. What he hunts, and how he uses what he catches, tends to bleed through everything he touches. The shield that reflects what you cast. Spellbreaker is a heavy shield obtained from Periite's Daedric quest, and it has a history in Elder Scrolls lore that stretches back to the First Era. According to Tamrielic lore, the artifact compendium written by Yagrum Bagan, it was created on behalf of King Rorken, a Dwemer chieftain who led his clan out of Resdain, when the rest of the Dwemer formed an alliance with the Chimer. Rorken threw his ceremonial hammer, Volendrung, across Tamriel and followed it to what became Hammerfell, carving out a kingdom there. Later, Rorken and his clan found themselves in conflict with the legendary wizard Shalidor, the Battle of Rorken-Shalidor. And the Spellbreaker was made specifically to counter Shalidor's magic. The shield's defining property is a 30% chance to reflect incoming spells back at their caster, making it extraordinarily dangerous to attack the wielder with magic. It was lost in the final battle. The Dwemer disappeared, and yet the shield survived, somehow intact through the collapse of the civilization that made it, until it ended up as the token reward of a Daedric prince whose domain is pestilence. How Peryite acquired the artifact of a Dwemer king is a question the lore has never answered. The blades who died in service of a relic. The armor of Tiber Septim is not simply a piece of equipment. It is a memorial, a shrine, and the physical remnant of the man who became a god. After Tiber Septim's victory at the Battle of Sencretor in the Second Era, he gave his armor to the Blades, his elite guard, in honor of their role in the battle. The Blades built a shrine in the catacombs beneath Sancretor, on the very spot where Tiber Septim received the blessing of Akatosh. For generations, the shrine was a place of pilgrimage for Blades seeking to connect with the legacy of their order's greatest emperor. Then the Underking came. The catacombs were corrupted. 4 of the greatest Blades of their generation were sent into Sancretor to cleanse it, and none of them returned. The armor remained sealed inside, along with the ghosts of the 4 Blades who had failed for centuries. Their spirits walked the halls and guarded what they could not save. When the hero of Kvatch finally entered Sancretor during the Oblivion Crisis, those 4 ghosts had been waiting for hundreds of years. The infamy test. You must pass to wear the relics. The Crusaders' relics are a set of Aedric artifacts created by the 8 divines and given to Pelinal Whitestrake, the divine crusader, in the ancient First Era. Pelinal used them to battle Umaril the Unfeathered, the Ayleid sorcerer king, before being struck a fatal blow in that battle. When the relics are recovered during the Knights of the Nine questline, they come with a restriction that is unlike almost anything else in the game. They can only be equipped by a character whose infamy rating is 1 or less. If you commit a single major crime, murder, a serious theft, anything that pushes infamy above 1, the relics will remove themselves from your body with a warning. Your crimes have made you unfit. You must complete a pilgrimage to clear your sins before they can be worn again. This restriction does not end when the Knights of the Nine questline is completed. It is permanent. The gods are watching the whole time. Holy armor that adapts to the warrior wearing it. The Crusaders' relics are not static objects. They scale. When you first obtain the relics, they are relatively modest in their stats. Functional, but not dramatically superior to the equipment you might already own at a low level. But as you level up, the relics change. Place them on the armor stand in the Priory of the Nine, and they convert to the appropriate tier for your current level. At low levels, they are roughly equivalent to iron. At mid-levels, they rise to Orcish, then ebony. At level 21 and above, they reach Daedric tier statistics. The relics are, in this sense, growing with you, adjusting to meet you where you are. This is not a passive process. You have to use the armor stand to trigger it. The stand itself is another detail worth noting. Placing the relics on it fully repairs them and recharges their enchantments, even allowing you to push the armor past its standard maximum condition by exploiting the repair threshold, which gives you an effectively infinite training resource for the armorer's skill. When the Helm of the Crusader calms the world, each piece of the Crusader's relics carries its own unique power, and together they do something spectacular but individually, the helm of the Crusader stands out for the strangeness of its effect. When equipped, it grants the lesser power serene beauty, a calm effect that reaches creatures and NPCs up to level 100, lasting 10 seconds. In a game where crowd control is rarely this elegant, a helmet that simply makes everything around you stop wanting to fight you is an extraordinary tool. The helm was created by Dibella, the divine of beauty and love, and its name and its power are consistent with her domain. A piece of armor that transmits beauty as a survival mechanism, that turns the act of wearing a helmet into an act of disarmament, is the kind of design that only makes sense through a divine lens. Dibella is not about war. She made armor and then made it as unwarlike as armor can possibly be. The boots that make animals leave you alone. The boots of the Crusader carry an enchantment called Woodland Grace, which is one of the most quietly useful powers in the game. While wearing the boots, most natural creatures will not attack you. Wolves, bears, boars, mountain lions. The animals of Cyrodiil simply let you pass. You can still attack them, and if you strike first, they will fight back. But unprovoked, they will not initiate. This is the domain of Kinnereth, the divine of air and sky and the natural world, whose artifact the boots represent. The mechanic is implemented by adding the player to a hidden faction called ND Predators, at rank 0, one with nature. And natural animals respect that membership. Mudcrabs and rats are specifically excluded from this effect, which is the game's acknowledgement that some creatures are too primal or too annoying to be charmed by any divine footwear. The shield that carries the weight of 2 Crusaders. The fastened shield of the Crusader is the only piece of the Crusader's relic set that carries no enchantment. It is a wooden shield emblazoned with the Chimael Adabal symbol, and it is simply a shield, sturdy, reliable, and entirely without magical effect. This is unusual. Every other piece of the set has a specific divine attached to it, a specific power, a specific purpose. The shield, tied to Julianos, the divine of wisdom and logic, simply protects. Some fans have interpreted this as intentional design. Julianos, the god of reason and scholarship, would not place magic on a shield. A shield is for blocking. Its value is self-evident. The logic of the Crusader's shield is the logic of the shield itself. What you see is what it does. In a set of armor that is otherwise thick with mythological enchantment, the shield's simplicity is almost conspicuous. The set that carries the full power of holy war. When all 6 pieces of the Crusader's relics are worn simultaneously, the player gains an ability called Holy Aura. Holy Aura provides a 5% shield effect and activates Umril's Bane, a debuff applied to Umril the Unfeathered himself during the final confrontation of the Knights of the Nine questline. The mechanics behind Umril's Bane are fascinating and a little unusual. Umril's base values for agility, luck, and strength are set very low, between 5 and 35 depending on the player's level. Normally, those values are secretly fortified by 60 points each to make him a credible opponent. Umril's Bane simply turns off that fortification. It does not curse him. It reveals what he actually is without the divine buffering. The full set of holy armor does not make Umril weaker. It removes the disguise that made him appear powerful. The set that changes based on who you are. There is another hidden layer to the Crusader's relics. There are both heavy armor and light armor versions of every piece, and which version you receive is determined by your skill distribution at a specific point in the questline. During the quest called the Shrine of the Crusader, if your heavy armor skill is higher than your light armor skill, you receive heavy versions. If light armor is higher, you receive light versions. If both skills are equal, the game defaults to heavy. This means that two players doing the same questline could end up with fundamentally different armor tiers, and the relics will scale differently depending on that choice. A character who has invested in light armor will receive relics that function in an entirely different gameplay context than a character who specializes in heavy combat. The Divines apparently see you and outfit you accordingly. Dwarven Armor. Dwarven armor is a heavy armor set encountered in Oblivion that exists in a strange relationship with time. It looks ancient because it is ancient. The Dwemer, the dwarves of Elder Scrolls lore, disappeared entirely in the First Era during the Battle of Red Mountain, in an event whose full nature remains one of the great mysteries of the series. They were there, and then they were not. Their cities remained, their machines remained, and among the ruins, scattered across the automatons and constructs they left behind, their armor remained. The dwarven armor encountered in Oblivion is not new manufacture. It cannot be new manufacture. There are no Dwemer to make it. Every piece of dwarven armor in Cyrodiil was scavenged from ruins or stripped from animunculi, dwarven mechanical constructs, by those brave or foolish enough to venture into the remains of a civilization that simply stopped existing. Enthusiasts pay extraordinary prices for single pieces. A complete set is extraordinarily rare, and the few that exist are typically in the hands of collectors. A metal thousands of years old, still intact. The fact that dwarven armor remains functional centuries after the disappearance of its makers is a testament to the Dwemer's metallurgical skill that no craftsman in the Third Era can fully replicate. The secrets of dwarven armorcraft are described in the lore as long forgotten, not misplaced, not undiscovered, but gone with the civilization that created them. A steelsmith can look at dwarven armor and identify the techniques superficially. They can see the layering, the alloy composition at a glance, the unusual jointing in the plates, but they cannot reproduce it. The material itself, Dwemer metal, sometimes called dwarven metal, is a specific alloy whose precise composition has never been successfully decoded by outsiders. What is known is that it is heavy, extremely durable, and crafted with a level of precision that Third Era smiths consistently describe as beyond current capability. You are not wearing dwarven armor. You are wearing a museum piece that happens to still protect you. The level at which the world changes, Oblivion's leveled loot system, the engine that decides what armor you encounter in the world based on your current character level, follows a clear hierarchy. Iron armor begins at level 1, steel at level 3. Dwarven and chainmail both start appearing in loot around level 6. Orcish and mithril begin showing up at level 10. Elven and ebony start around level 15. Glass and daedric both begin spawning at level 20. This progression is not arbitrary. It follows the logic of the Manual of Armor, an in-game book that lays out the Imperial military's official ranking of armor types from lightest to heaviest, weakest to strongest. The book is a functional lore document that explains the exact same information the leveled list system encodes mechanically. The game's world and the game's books are telling the same story about what armor means and how hard it is to find. The merchants who never show you the good stuff. One of the practical realities of Oblivion's armor economy is that vendors are held to a stricter tier ceiling than the world itself. While the leveled loot system will populate dungeons and enemies with chainmail and dwarven armor beginning around level 6, merchants will not stock those tiers until level 10. Mithril and Orcish are only available in shops at level 15, and no vendor in the game will ever spontaneously stock glass or daedric, elven or ebony armor. These tiers are simply unavailable through normal mercantile channels, with one exception: certain unique named items like the Birthright of Astalon, which can be purchased from specific merchants regardless of level. The gap between what the world contains and what merchants will sell you is a deliberate design choice that pushes players toward exploration and combat as the primary means of acquiring high-tier gear rather than simply shopping for it. The chainmail built like an empire. The chainmail armor seen throughout Oblivion, worn by most of the Imperial Guards across Cyrodiil's cities, found on bandits and marauders at mid-levels, one of the most visually recognizable armor sets in the game, is described in lore as a form of plated mail, a hybrid of chain and plate construction that resembles, historically, the type of armor associated with the armies of the Mughal Empire. The Imperial Legion's choice of chainmail as standard equipment for its city guard forces reflects the armor's practical virtues. It is relatively light, flexible, available, and easy to maintain compared to the higher tiers. Most city guards wear chainmail with a city-specific cuirass and shield, the cuirass design varying by region. Skingrad is notably an exception. Skingrad's guards wear steel armor, reflecting the wealth and individual character of Count Janus Hasildor's administration. The signature armor of Kvatch. In the town of Kvatch, the city destroyed at the start of the main quest, and the location of one of the game's most dramatic early sequences. Specific pieces of chainmail armor are available in fixed locations regardless of the player's level. A chainmail helmet can be found in Savlian, Matius's tent outside the city walls, though taking it counts as theft. Inside the ruins of Castle Kvatch, an armory contains another helmet and a pair of chainmail boots. These fixed, non-leveled spawns exist because the developers designed Kvatch as an early game encounter where players might need equipment and resources regardless of where they are in the leveling curve. The city was important enough, story-wise, that the game seeds it with useful gear that will always be there. The chainmail of Kvatch is a small but deliberate act of design generosity hidden inside one of the game's darkest moments. Mithril, the metal that vanished and came back. Mithril armor occupies an interesting middle tier in Oblivion's light armor progression. Stronger than chainmail, weaker than elven, and described in lore as a metal with a surprisingly turbulent history. In ancient times, mithril was widely used by smithies across Tamriel, appearing in arms and armor everywhere. Then, for reasons that the lore does not fully explain, all traces of mithril vanished from the world around 2 E582. The metal simply stopped being available. For an unknown length of time, it existed only as a historical footnote, old pieces from before the disappearance, and nothing new. Then mithril resurfaced. By the late Third Era, during which Oblivion takes place, it had re-emerged in the Iliac Bay region, in Cyrodiil, and in the Shivering Isles. The reappearance is never explained. Something that old and that rare simply came back into the world, and nobody in the lore seems particularly surprised by it. The Lord's Mail and the Favour of Kinnereth. The Lord's Mail, also known as the Armour of Morahouse, or the Gift of Kinnereth, is a cuirass from Elder Scrolls lore that does not appear as an item in Oblivion's base game, but whose history is woven deeply into the world building of the series. It is described as an ancient cuirass of unsurpassable quality, granting the wearer the ability to absorb health, resist spells, and cure themselves of poison. The lore text associated with it is one of the more haunting item descriptions in the series. Whenever Kinnereth deigns the wearer unworthy, the Lord's mail will be taken away and hidden for the next chosen one. It is not an item you own. It is an item you are temporarily entrusted with. The idea that divine armor is not property, that it belongs to the will of a god and is simply on loan to whoever deserves it at the moment, is a thread that runs through much of Oblivion's unique armor lore, and nowhere more explicitly than in the Lord's Mail. The Ayleid crowns and the question of who you help. During the Secrets of the Ayleids questline, the player is asked to retrieve the crown of the Ayleids, specifically the Ayleid crown of Nenalata, from a collector named Herminia Sina, acting on behalf of the mysterious Lord Umbacano. Sina herself, knowing what Umbacano intends to do with it, suggests an alternative. Give him the Ayleid crown of Lindai instead. Both crowns are ancient elven helmets with powerful enchantments. The crown of Nenalata carries reflect spell and fortify effects that scale with the player's level. The crown of Lindai carries resist magic and similar fortify enchantments. If the player gives Umbacano the Lindai crown in place of the Nenalata crown, and Umbacano wears the wrong crown in the ruins of Nenalata, it loses all its armor value and enchantments entirely. An ancient artifact, powerful enough to crown an Ayleid king, is completely destroyed by being worn in the wrong place by the wrong person. The crown was made for a specific throne and a specific bloodline, and it knows the difference. The broken crown that keeps giving. There is a specific quirk associated with the Ayleid crown of Lindai that players who know about it have used for years as a training tool. If you give the Lindai crown to Umbacano and receive the broken version back, the ruined, enchantment-stripped, zero-value shell of the item, it cannot be repaired. Normally, items that cannot be repaired are simply useless, but if you are a high-level armorer, skilled enough to repair magical items, the broken crown provides infinite training attempts. You can attempt to repair the crown, consume the repair hammer durability, gain the skill experience, and loop the process indefinitely, because the crown's condition never improves and therefore never stops being repairable in the game's logic. The artifact of an ancient elven king becomes an armorer's whetstone. This is either the most undignified thing that ever happened to an Ayleid relic, or a very Cyrodiilic kind of repurposing. Amber armor and the logic of a mad god. The Shivering Isles. Expansion introduces two entirely new armor tiers unavailable anywhere in Cyrodiil: Amber and Madness. Amber armor is light armor crafted from the amber material found throughout Mania, the golden, joyful half of the Shivering Isles, Sheogorath's plane of oblivion. The armor is created by bringing raw amber and the appropriate amber matrix to a smith named Duma Grobonk at the Missing Pauldron. The matrices determine whether the final piece will be plain or enchanted. At the master level of the light armor skill, amber armor reaches an armor rating that exceeds glass. Sheogorath's version of top-tier light protection is better than anything available in the mortal world. This is entirely consistent with Sheogorath's character. His realm makes better things. The logic is mad, but the results are demonstrably superior. Madness armor and the dark side of the Isles, where amber is the product of mania, Madness armor is the product of dementia, the dark, paranoid, dying half of the Shivering Isles, where the landscape is perpetually autumnal, threatening, and soaked in shadow. Madness armor is heavy armor, and at max skill it reaches armor ratings that exceed Daedric, making it, technically, the single strongest heavy armor available in any version of Oblivion's world. The Madness armor set has a distinctive visual aesthetic: bulky, organic, asymmetrical, with what appears to be a shell or carapace construction. One of the shields in the set appears to be made from the shell of a horseshoe crab. The game's Shivering Isles armor occupies a strange ontological position. It is technically accessible to the player within the same game, but it exists in a realm outside the mortal world, made by a mad god, from materials that only exist in insanity. The fact that it outperforms Daedric is Sheogorath's understated editorial comment on everything in Cyrodiil. The diadem that makes you smarter. Among the unique headgear available in the Shivering Isles, the Diadem of Euphoria is a piece of clothing, not technically armor, that provides a significant boost to magicka. It is worn as a helmet slot item, meaning it occupies the same inventory position as a helmet, and its boost to magical reserves is substantial enough to make it competitive with actual helmets for magic-heavy builds. The item's name is self-explanatory in the context of the Shivering Isles. Euphoria is one of the emotional states that mania perpetually induces. The diadem is the Isles externalizing the feeling of expanded mental capacity as a physical object. Wearing it does not make you euphoric in a gameplay sense, but the implication is that the mental sharpness it provides, the clarity of enhanced magicka, is what Euphoria actually is when stripped of its chaos. Armor that grows stronger with mastery. One of the most important and most underappreciated mechanical facts about armor in Oblivion is that the protection it provides is not fixed. The armor rating of any piece is modified by both the player's skill level in the appropriate armor type and the armor's current condition. At low skill, even Daedric armor underperforms dramatically relative to its listed stats. At 100 skill in light armor, something remarkable happens. Light armor becomes weightless while worn, and its effectiveness rises to 150%. This means that at maximum skill, Elven armor provides protection equivalent to ebony. Glass armor, at maximum skill, provides protection equivalent to Daedric. The entire tier structure inverts for a sufficiently skilled light armor wearer. The game is quietly making an argument about mastery that goes deeper than its stats. The weapon and the warrior are always a partnership, and the warrior's skill matters as much as the equipment itself. The 85% cap and the hidden ceiling. No matter how much armor rating you accumulate in Oblivion, there is a hard ceiling on the protection it provides. The maximum armor rating that actually affects damage reduction is 85%. Once your combined armor rating reaches that threshold, additional armor pieces, additional enchantments, and additional skill simply do not improve your survivability. This cap is not advertised clearly in the interface. Many players spend significant effort upgrading and enchanting armor long past the point where it makes any difference, because the game does not explain that they have already hit the ceiling. The 85% cap is balanced against the game's decision to have damage bypass the cap entirely for certain attack types, ensuring that no amount of armor makes you literally invincible. You can absorb 85% of each hit. The remaining 15% will always find you. The random body part that gets hit. Here is a mechanical detail about armor damage in Oblivion that most players never consciously register, but that shapes every single combat interaction in the game. When a hit lands on the player, the game does not simply check whether the attack hit. It selects a random body part, head, upper body, hands, legs, feet, or shield, and checks whether that body part is armored. If the selected body part has armor protecting it, the game applies the armor rating of that specific piece. If it does not, the hit deals its full damage. This means that a character wearing a complete set of armor is protected on every roll. A character wearing only a cuirass and greaves is unprotected on roughly a third of all rolls. The randomness is not modeling skill. It is modeling the chaotic geometry of real combat, where strikes land in ways that even the best armor cannot always anticipate. Wearing a full set matters not because any single piece is critical, but because every piece covers one of the possible unlucky rolls. The rounding error that costs you protection. There is a subtle and rarely discussed rounding behavior in Oblivion's armor calculation that results in players consistently receiving slightly less protection than the displayed armor rating would suggest. When the game calculates how much damage a piece of armor absorbs, it first rounds the base armor rating down to the nearest whole number. So a piece with a base armor rating of 6.75 is treated as having a rating of 6 for all subsequent calculations. The reduction is small on any individual hit. Across thousands of combat interactions, across a full playthrough, the cumulative effect is a meaningful difference between the protection the game appears to offer and the protection it actually provides. The numbers bear this out clearly. A full Daedric set pushed to 125% armor health, the over-repaired maximum achievable through skilled use of the armorer's skill, delivers a 92% armor rating rather than the mathematically expected 93.75. At a standard 100% condition, the same full set lands at 72% rather than 75. This is not a bug. It is the result of deliberate rounding behavior applied consistently across every combat calculation in the game. Spell effectiveness and the hidden cost of armor. Every piece of armor in Oblivion comes with a hidden penalty that magic-focused players need to understand. Wearing armor reduces spell effectiveness. This is the game's implementation of the classic RPG tension between defense and magical potency. If you are wearing a full set of heavy Daedric armor and attempting to cast spells, your spells will be noticeably less effective than they would be on the same character in robes. The game does not always make this penalty transparent in the tooltip, and many players discover it only after noticing that their supposedly powerful magician is underperforming in heavy plate. This mechanic creates a genuine cost-benefit calculation for hybrid builds. The warrior mage, who wants both physical protection and magical power, must accept that each investment in armor comes at a cost to the other side of their character. The goblin berserker who carries dwarven equipment. One of the more counterintuitive early game facts about armor distribution in Oblivion is that goblin berserkers, found in specific tribal dungeons, can carry dwarven shields and light iron shields from level 1, not from level 6, when dwarven gear normally begins appearing, from level 1, at the very start of the game. Similarly, tribal goblin skirmishers can carry leather and steel shields from the beginning. These exceptions to the standard leveled list behavior exist because the goblin tribes are designed as specific ecological groups with their own equipment logic, separate from the general world scaling. The goblins did not acquire dwarven shields through the normal channels of Cyrodiil's marketplace. They acquired them through raiding, scavenging, and accumulating whatever they could from the ruins and bodies around them. A goblin carrying a dwarven shield is a goblin who found something very old and has no idea what it is worth. Chainmail's hidden early appearance. Despite chainmail officially beginning to appear in loot at level 6, there is a quest available from the very start of the game, two sides of the coin, whose conclusion allows the player to loot a complete set of chainmail from a specific named NPC, regardless of the player's level. The body of Tyrellius Logellus, the target of the quest, carries a full chainmail set, minus the helmet, along with a silver longsword. This fixed, non-leveled spawn exists because the quest was designed to provide a specific type of challenge and reward, and the developers wanted the reward to be consistent regardless of when the player encountered it. It is one of dozens of small fixed item placements throughout Cyrodiil that allow observant players to bypass the leveled loot system and acquire better equipment earlier than the world would normally offer it. The Elven Shield Anomaly. When the leveled lists were assembled for Oblivion, a specific substitution was made that has unusual downstream effects on Orcish loot distribution. Elven shields were substituted for Orcish shields on several of the NPC leveled lists, meaning that NPCs, who would normally be expected to carry Orcish shields, are instead carrying Elven shields when those lists fire. This makes Orcish shields noticeably harder to find than other Orcish equipment. You can have a complete collection of Orcish armor, helmet, cuirass, greaves, boots, gauntlets, and still have no Orcish shield, because the shield slot was populated with a substitution that was never corrected. Players who want a complete Orcish set must specifically hunt for the shield, either through boss-level enemies or non-standard loot sources. The substitution appears to be an oversight rather than a design decision, a small editorial mark left in the game's data, the Helm of Orin Bearclaw and what it replaced. The Helm of Orin Bearclaw is a unique helmet given to the player by Modrin Orin as a reward for completing the Fighters Guild questline, and it carries a legacy that cuts deeper the more you look at it. Orin Bearclaw was, according to the stories told in Tamrielic lore, a book written by Yagrum Bargon, the last living Dwemer, one of Valenwood's greatest heroes, a Dunmer hunter, single-handedly slew the witch serpent Glenwyfonva and brought peace to his clan. The catch, and it is a quiet, devastating one, is that according to Malakath himself, most of those legendary accomplishments were actually performed by Orin's Orcish companion, Kara Grokar, hero of the Shatul clan. Orin Bearclaw, by this account, simply took the credit. The helm that bears his name is therefore named after a fraud. It is enchanted with Fortify Agility and Fortify Endurance, and it looks as imposing as its legendary status would suggest. The Bosmer and Dunmer traditions remember Orin as the hero. The Orcish tradition, endorsed by Malakath himself, holds that Karag was the one who actually did the deed. Both sides claim the helm, which means wearing it is wearing the center of a centuries-old argument about who really deserves to be remembered, and whether the legend anyone holds on to is the true one. The Bloodworm Helm and Necromancer's Power. The Bloodworm Helm is a unique heavy helmet associated with Mannimarco, the King of Worms, the most powerful necromancer in the history of Tamriel, who features as an antagonist in the Mages Guild questline. The helm fortifies conjuration and allows the wearer to cast Summon Skeleton and Command Humanoid as lesser powers. It is equipment designed for a specific style of play, raising, commanding, and deploying the dead. The lore around Mannimarco describes him as a figure who transcended mortality, who used necromantic techniques developed over centuries to achieve a form of immortality, eventually becoming the god Mannimarco in some versions of the lore. The Bloodworm Helm is, in that context, not just a piece of equipment. It is the calling card of a tradition, an invitation to participate in practices that the Mages Guild specifically prohibits. The Archmage's Hood and the weight of the title. The Archmage's Hood is the ceremonial headgear of the Archmage of the Mages Guild in Cyrodiil, the highest ranking position in the organization. It is a piece of clothing rather than armor, providing no physical protection, but carrying enchantments appropriate to its symbolic role. The hood is passed from Archmage to Archmage as a marker of the office. When the player completes the Mages Guild questline and ascends to the position of Archmage, they receive the hood as part of their new authority. The fact that it offers no armor rating is significant. The Archmage is not a warrior. The protection that matters in this office is magical, institutional, and reputational. The hood says who you are. In a game full of items that protect the body, the Archmage's hood is an item that simply marks its wearer as someone the game's most powerful magical organization has decided to trust. Escutcheon of coral and a shield that tells the city's story. The Escutcheon of Coral is a unique shield obtainable through the questline that culminates in the quest called Sins of the Father, which requires the player to recover the honor blade of coral, an ancient heirloom of the city's ruling family, and return it to its rightful owners, rather than hand it to a thieves' guild fence named Fathis Yules. The shield bears the great oak, the symbol of coral, embossed on its face, and carries enchantments for fortify endurance and reflect damage that scale with the player's level. What makes the escutcheon interesting in lore terms is what it represents about coral specifically. Coral is one of the more understated cities in Cyrodiil, a town of foresters and scholars sitting below the Gerald Mountains, with a reputation for a certain steady, unshowy competence. The escutcheon is the physical emblem of that identity. It does not have the flash of an Ayleid crown or the dark glamour of a Daedric artifact. It is a city shield made for a city and earned only by someone who chose integrity over profit when the game gave them a clear opportunity to do otherwise. The ancient elven helm found in the ruins. The ancient elven helm is a unique piece of headgear found during specific questlines involving the Ayleids. The ancient wild elves who built the ruins that dot Cyrodiil's landscape. In terms of its history within the world, the helm predates the Alessian revolt that drove the Ayleids from power in the First Era, placing it in a period when the wild elves were the dominant civilization of Cyrodiil, building their cities in white stone and practicing their unique form of magic. The helm is a physical fragment of that civilization, something that survived the fall of the Ayleids, their expulsion, their centuries of decline into isolated bands of survivors hiding in the forests. Picking it up is picking up the edge of a history that the game mostly leaves in the background. The Ayleids built the ruins. They built the wells of Vala and Welkind. Their civilization left more behind than its architecture, the Agronach's raiment, and the tragedy of the arena. Agronach Gro Malog, the grand champion of the Imperial City arena, known throughout Cyrodiil as the Grey Prince, is one of the game's more quietly tragic figures. He is half-orc, visibly paler than most of his kind, and the source of that pallor is the secret he never wanted answered. His father was a vampire, the noble Lord Leviticus, locked away in the ruins of Crowhaven for decades, who had passed his vampiric blood down to a son who never knew the nature of his own strength. Agronach's extraordinary fighting abilities, his unnatural edge, the quality that made him unbeatable for nearly a decade, all of it came from that heritage. His raiment, the unique armor he wears as Grand Champion, is stripped of its significance once you understand what the quest reveals. The player can choose to complete the quest and return the journal that exposes the truth before the final arena fight. Upon learning it, Agronach loses the will to fight. He stands in the arena and allows himself to be killed, saying he does not want to live knowing what he is. The game counts it as murder. His armor becomes a relic of a champion who simply stepped aside. The raiment does not change. The person wearing it does. the Blackwater leather cuirass and faction identity. Throughout Cyrodiil, various factions and organizations have unique armor sets that mark membership and function as visual shorthand for institutional identity. The Blackwater leather cuirass is an example of this, armor associated with the Blackwater Brigands and worn by members of that criminal organization as a mark of their affiliation. Like many faction-specific items in Oblivion, it functions both as equipment and as identity. Wearing it sends a message. Looting it from a defeated enemy and carrying it in your inventory carries the implicit history of what it meant to whoever wore it before you. The Brigands, as an organized criminal enterprise with enough internal structure to have specific gear, are one of the more developed criminal factions in Cyrodiil outside of the Dark Brotherhood and the Thieves Guild, and their armor, modest as it is part of how the game communicates that development. The Oblivion Armor Set and a Family's Decline. The Oblivion Family Armor Set is one of the more narratively loaded pieces of equipment in Oblivion. It is obtained through the Fighters Guild quest called Amelion's Debt, which involves a widow named Biene Amelion, whose family fell into debt and whose grandfather Brucev left his ancestral armor in the family tomb as collateral. The tomb is located northeast of Leowyn, and the set, cuirass, helmet, greaves, boots, and gauntlets is scattered throughout it as light armor pieces with a distinctive appearance that resembles ebony but in a silver coloring. In mechanical terms, Brucev Amelion's armor is only slightly better than chainmail, and notably heavier than the protection it provides would justify for a light armor set. The cuirass and sword are enchanted. The rest of the pieces are not. What makes the set meaningful is the story attached to it. The armor of a once distinguished military family, buried with the last of that lineage's proud tradition, turns out to be mediocre equipment that a widow is willing to trade away to cover a debt. The gap between what the family believed their heritage was worth and what the world's evaluation of that legacy looks like by the time of the Oblivion crisis is the quiet tragedy the armor tells without a word of narration. The bands of Kuang Lao and a hidden skill. The bands of Kuang Lao are unique gauntlets that fortify hand-to-hand by 20 points, one of the highest hand-to-hand boosts available in the game from a single item. They are available from level 1 and sit in a fixed location, making them one of the few pieces of genuinely high-value equipment accessible from the very beginning. Hand-to-hand in Oblivion is an often overlooked combat skill, the ability to fight without weapons at all, using only fists. It is a valid and internally consistent combat approach, with its own mechanics around damaging fatigue rather than health. The bands of Kuang Lao are designed for this playstyle, and the fact that they are available from level 1 is the game's quiet endorsement of pursuing an unorthodox path from the beginning, rather than waiting for the world to catch up to the idea that bare hands can be a legitimate weapon. The Fists of the Drunkard and comedy in heavy plate. The Fists of the Drunkard are a unique pair of gauntlets sold by merchants that carry a Drain Agility enchantment. They reduce the wearer's agility, which affects balance, dodging, and combat effectiveness. This is a debuff, applied to the wearer rather than an enemy. The name and the effect tell a small story. These are the gauntlets of someone who has been fighting while impaired, and the quality of their combat craft reflects their condition. In a game full of powerful aspirational equipment, the Fists of the Drunkard are a piece of armor that does the player a mild disservice while providing its own marginal physical protection. The joke is understated and entirely consistent with Oblivion's occasional willingness to include equipment that exists for flavor as much as function. the Gauntlets of Gluttony and the Vice's stats. The Gauntlets of Gluttony are another merchant-sold unique item that plays with the idea of armor as a moral statement. They fortify strength, which is a useful effect, but also drain agility, which counteracts some of the offensive benefit. The name suggests that physical power at the cost of grace and precision is exactly what gluttony looks like in armor form. You are stronger, but clumsier. You take more. You move less elegantly. The gauntlets are not powerful enough to be seriously competitive equipment, but they exist as a small meditation on the relationship between vice and capability. Strength that costs agility is strength that carries its own limitation. The game frames desire as self-defeating even at the level of equipment stats. Dondoran's Juggernaut and Monkey Pants. Among the named unique armor items sold by merchants throughout Cyrodiil, Dondoran's Juggernaut is a set of heavy armor cuirass that carries a Fortify Endurance enchantment, reflecting the Juggernaut concept of raw physical resilience built into the very frame of the armor. Its name suggests a specific owner, and the implication is that Dondoran was someone of reputation, a warrior known for an aggressive, unstoppable fighting style. The armor is sold in Cyrodiil's specialty shops and is available regardless of the player's level, making it accessible early if you have the gold. Sitting nearby in the same merchant catalogues is a piece of equipment that could not be more different in tone. Monkey Pants, an item whose name alone makes it one of the most memorable pieces of equipment in the game. The contrast between Dondoran's heavy, serious military framing and Monkey Pants existing in the same commercial context is exactly the kind of casual absurdism that Oblivion never fully explains. The Quicksilver Boots and the Speed of Light Feet. The Quicksilver Boots are a pair of uniquely enchanted boots sold by specific merchants in Cyrodiil and available at high levels, carrying a Fortify Speed enchantment that significantly boosts the player's movement rate. Speed in Oblivion governs how fast a character moves in all contexts: walking, running, swimming, riding. And a high enough speed stat changes the feel of navigating Cyrodiil's landscape dramatically. The Quicksilver Boots represent a design philosophy that runs through Oblivion's unique item catalogue. The idea that armor can modify identity as much as protection. Boots that make you faster are not just better footwear, they change how you inhabit the world. A character in Quicksilver Boots experiences Cyrodiil differently. The map shrinks, the travel time compresses, the sensation of being an alert and present explorer intensifies. The boots are named for the liquid metal that represents speed in alchemical tradition, and the name earns itself every time you move. The Rashida's Special and the Smith's Signature. Rashida is a blacksmith in the city of Coral, a human woman whose forge sits near the west gate of the city. She sells a specific piece of uniquely named armor, Rashida's Special, a cuirass with a Fortify Endurance enchantment. What makes this item interesting in the context of Oblivion's world is what it implies about the economy and culture of enchanted smithing. Rashida did not receive this piece from a Daedric shrine quest or plunder it from an ancient ruin. She made it, or had it made, and put her own name on it. Rashida's Special is a professional craftsperson's signature piece, equipment with her name on it, sold out of her shop, carrying an enchantment that reflects her understanding of what fighters need. In a world full of legendary artifacts and ancient relics, the existence of a blacksmith's personally branded enchanted armor is a small reminder that not all magic items come from Daedric princes. The Tower of the Nine and the shield that guards divinity. The Tower of the Nine is a unique shield available from merchants. a piece of heavy armor named with the resonance of Oblivion's primary mythological preoccupation, the Nine Divines and the towers that structure the metaphysics of the world. In Elder Scrolls lore, towers are massive architectural constructs whose purpose is to maintain the stability of reality itself. Each tower anchors something fundamental about the way Nirn continues to exist. The White Gold Tower in the Imperial City is one of these structures. A shield named the Tower of the Nine is invoking that entire cosmological framework as its metaphor for what a shield does. It holds a line, it maintains a boundary, it keeps something crucial from collapsing. The enchantments on the Tower of the Nine are defensive in nature, entirely consistent with that framing. It is armor that understands what armor means. The Aegis of the Apocalypse and endgame protection. The Aegis of the Apocalypse is one of the highest quality named shields available for purchase from merchants in Cyrodiil, carrying enchantments that place its defensive value near the upper tier of what commercially available items can provide, at levels just below Daedric quality. Its name is theatrical and pointed. An Aegis is a divine shield, associated in classical mythology with divine protection, and the apocalypse referred to is the Oblivion crisis itself. The opening of Oblivion gates across Cyrodiil, the threat of Mehrunes Dagon's full manifestation into the mortal world. A shield named the Aegis of the Apocalypse, sold during the exact apocalyptic moment whose name it bears, is the game acknowledging its own narrative context. The merchants of Cyrodiil kept selling enchanted equipment even as the world was potentially ending, and some of them named their merchandise accordingly. The chain spell Infinite Loop. There is a technique hidden inside Oblivion's spell-making system, so elegant it borders on beautiful. And the best part is that it isn't a glitch at all. It works entirely within the rules the developers put in place, which makes it feel less like an exploit and more like discovering a secret the game was quietly daring you to find. It's called a chain spell, and the logic behind it is almost meditative once it clicks. When you include a Fortify Magicka effect in a custom spell, the game adds that Magicka to your pool before it deducts the casting cost. So if you design a spell whose Fortify Magicka component is larger than the total cost of everything else in the spell, you end up with more Magicka after casting than you had before. The spell has paid for itself. Then you cast it again and again. Each cast generates a surplus, and that surplus funds the next cast in an endless, self-sustaining loop. The real power comes from stacking additional effects onto this framework. Attach a fireball to your chain spell, or paralysis, or invisibility, and because the Fortify Magicka component covers the combined cost, all of those effects become effectively free. You're casting whatever you want, indefinitely, with a Magicka pool that never empties. For characters born under the Atronach birth sign who cannot regenerate Magicka naturally, this is less a convenience and more a revelation. Their defining weakness simply stops existing. One carefully assembled spell at the altar of spell making dismantles the entire resource economy of the game, and you never have to think about running dry again. The Welkin Stone Supply Network. Most players treat Welkin Stones as a backup resource, something to crack open in an emergency when Magicka runs low during a tough fight. But players who truly understand them treat them as infrastructure, and the difference in how they experience the game is enormous. Each Welkin Stone fully restores your entire Magicka pool the instant you activate it, no matter how large that pool is. A mage with 1,000 points of Magicka benefits just as much from a single stone as someone with 100. And layered on top of that full restoration is a temporary Fortify Magicka bonus that pushes your cap even higher for a short window. The stones don't cost gold. They don't weigh you down. They're simply waiting in Ayleid ruins across every corner of Cyrodiil, placed there by a civilization that fell thousands of years ago and left their glowing libraries behind. There are dozens of these ruins, and each contains multiple stones. Experienced mages don't wander Cyrodiil randomly. They learn the landscape through the lens of stone locations, noting which ruins cluster near dungeon chains so they can plan resupply stops between delves. For Atronach characters in particular, this knowledge is transformative. Without natural regeneration, the Atronach relies on absorbed spells and external sources, and Welkin stones are the single most generous external source in the game. Mapping Cyrodiil by stone density rather than by quest markers turns the open world into something that feels alive and purposeful, a network of ancient power that rewards the mage patient enough to learn where it rests. The Ayleid Well Daily Ritual. Ayleid wells look like decorative features of the landscape. Ancient stone basins rising from the ground near old ruins, glowing faintly in the dark with trapped, pre-mundane light. Most players run past them without a second thought, but those who stop and drink from them discover something worth planning an entire day's travel around. Each well restores up to 400 points of magicka and grants a temporary 50-point Fortify Magicka boost, and the well resets once every 24 in-game hours. They're free, they're permanent, and there are enough of them scattered across Cyrodiil that a mage who knows their locations can build an entire travel route around them, stopping at wells like a caravan stops at oases, arriving with a depleted pool and leaving recharged without spending a coin, or cracking open a single stone. For Atronach characters, Ayleid wells become as important as any city or guild hall. They're the fixed points around which a naturally regeneration-starved build finds its rhythm. Some players map out loops specifically, designing routes that pass 2 or 3 wells per day of in-game travel, keeping their reserves full through movement alone. The wells also stack with Welkin stones found nearby, meaning major Ayleid ruin complexes function as complete magicka restoration hubs. Learn where the wells are, and Oblivion's open world stops feeling like an obstacle and starts feeling like a system designed to reward the mage who reads it carefully. The Lucky Old Lady Infinite Absorption. In the Imperial City's Elven Gardens district, there is a small statue of a woman holding a coin. She's called the Lucky Old Lady, and most players who interact with her notice the brief boon she provides and move on. What they miss is that this statue can be activated an unlimited number of times, and for characters with the Atronach birth sign, each activation is a free magicka restoration. The statue casts a minor blessing effect on activation, and because Atronach characters have 50% base spell absorption, roughly half of those activations convert directly into magicka rather than granting the blessing. With 100% spell absorption, every single activation converts, and because the statue resets instantly with no cooldown between presses, you can stand in front of the Lucky Old Lady and spam the activation button until your magicka pool is completely full. No potions needed, no travel required, no waiting. Just repeated, rapid interactions with a modest stone statue in a quiet corner of the Imperial City, quietly siphoning magical energy from a civic good luck charm. It's one of those interactions that the game never tells you about, and that you'd only discover through the specific combination of birth sign knowledge, absorption mechanics understanding, and genuine curiosity about what every interactable object in the world actually does. For low-level Atronach mages who haven't yet established their Welkin stone supply lines. The lucky old lady can feel like finding a hidden well in a desert. The weakness to magic apprentice. Exclusive. There is exactly one way to acquire the weakness to magic effect for use in spellmaking and enchanting without completing difficult prerequisite steps, and it requires making a single decision at the very start of the game before you ever leave the tutorial sewers. Choose the apprentice birth sign, and weakness to magic becomes available to you at the altar of spellmaking, unlocking one of the most powerful damage amplification tools in the entire game from the moment you gain Arcane University access. The effect doubles and triples magical damage by making targets temporarily more vulnerable to all schools simultaneously, and because it affects every type of magic rather than a single element, it synergizes with virtually any offensive build. Without the apprentice birth sign, accessing this effect requires reaching journeyman level in destruction, which is one of the slower skills to level organically. That's a significant investment of time and effort just to unlock a single effect. The apprentice birth sign gives it to you for free, at the cost of a 100% weakness to magic you carry yourself, meaning every spell that hits you deals double damage. It's a high-risk, high-reward foundation that creates the most explosive offensive mage builds in the game. Every custom spell you craft can begin with weakness to magic, and what follows that weakness hits twice as hard before any additional stacking. The birth sign is rarely recommended in beginner guides because its drawback is so punishing, but advanced players who understand the offensive geometry it unlocks treat it as a secret weapon hiding in plain sight on the character creation screen. The Doomstone Power Refresh. Scattered across the wilderness of Cyrodiil are Doomstones, standing stones carved with constellation symbols that grant unique greater or lesser powers when activated. Most players find one or two by accident and use the provided power a few times before forgetting it exists. What they miss is that Doomstones can be revisited and reactivated, and each activation refreshes the power associated with that stone. Greater powers from Doomstones, unlike birth sign powers, are not immune to silence, and they don't come with the unlimited daily use that certain racial and birth sign powers enjoy. But the reactivation mechanic means you can return to a stone repeatedly to refresh your power supply. The Eye of Night granted by the Serpent Stone, the intelligence-boosting effects from magic-aligned stones, the movement and offensive powers from warrior-aligned stones, all of these can be recharged by revisiting their source. For a traveling mage who routes their journeys through wilderness areas, incorporating a Doomstone stop into regular travel builds a collection of daily refresh powers that supplement their permanent build. The stones are also usable by any character regardless of level, meaning early game characters who discover them gain access to effects that would otherwise require significant investment to obtain through conventional spells and enchantments. The wilderness of Cyrodiil rewards exploration with these markers, and players who seek them out receive a portfolio of powers that the game's main path would never hand them. The Reflect Spell Priority Correction. Here is something that the game's interface never explains, yet fundamentally changes how you should build a defensive mage character. When an enemy spell flies toward you, 3 defensive systems have a chance to intercept it: Reflect Spell, Spell Absorption, and Resist Magic. These don't all trigger simultaneously. They check in a specific order, and the order isn't the one most players assume. Reflect Spell is checked first. If the Reflect check succeeds, the spell bounces. If it fails, Spell Absorption is checked second, and if Absorption triggers, the spell's energy converts to Magicka. Only if both of those checks fail does Resist Magic reduce the damage. The critical consequence is that Reflect spell and spell absorption compete, not cooperate. If you have 100% Reflect, all spells bounce and absorption never fires, meaning your Atronach birth sign's 50% absorption is wasted. If you're trying to refuel magicka through absorption, stacking high Reflect actually works against you by intercepting spells before absorption can convert them. Understanding this priority system doesn't just optimize your gear choices, it forces you to decide what you actually want your defensive build to accomplish. If you want to never take spell damage, Reflect to 100 is the answer. If you want to sustain magicka through combat, lower Reflect and higher absorption serves you better. These are fundamentally different builds with fundamentally different gear requirements, and confusing them by misunderstanding the priority chain produces characters that don't actually do either job. The Fortify magicka regeneration misconception. This is one of the most widespread misunderstandings in the entire game, and it quietly undermines dozens of mage builds built by players who never investigated the mechanics carefully enough to catch it. Fortify magicka does not increase how fast your magicka regenerates. It increases how much magicka you have, giving you a larger pool that still fills at exactly the same rate it always did. The number of points that replenish per second is governed entirely by your willpower attribute, not by Fortify magicka. So a mager who loads up every item slot with Fortify magicka enchantments and then wonders why their magicka still feels slow to return is not building wrong, exactly, but they're spending enchantment slots on depth when they also need speed. 1,000-point magicka pool with poor willpower refills slowly. A 400-point pool with maximized willpower refills quickly. The optimal approach combines both, using intelligence to generate a deep pool and willpower to ensure that pool replenishes at a rate that supports active combat. Fortify willpower effects, available through both potions and enchantments, directly increase regeneration speed in a way Fortify magicka never can. Swapping even one Fortify magicka enchantment for a Fortify willpower enchantment on a character with poor willpower investment produces a noticeable and immediate improvement in how sustainable their spellcasting feels. The misunderstanding persists because the two stats both relate to magicka in the attribute panel, and the game doesn't display regeneration rate as a visible number, making the difference invisible unless you actively test and measure it. The birth sign powers silence immunity. When an enemy hits you with silence, you lose the ability to cast any spell for the duration. It's one of the most crippling debuffs in the game for dedicated mages, because your entire combat kit vanishes instantly. Weapons you don't have, armor you can't cast, healing you can't access. You're essentially removed from the fight while the enemy continues attacking freely. However, powers granted by birth signs cannot be silenced. If you're born under the mage sign and that birth sign grants you a power, you can still activate that power while under a silence effect, because the game treats birth sign powers as racially inherent abilities rather than conventional spellcasting. This is a small but meaningful survival mechanic. Atronach characters under silence can still absorb spells. Racial healing powers from the Lord birth sign still fire. Planning your character around a birth sign that provides at least one combat-relevant power gives you an emergency option that silence cannot strip away. There's also a secondary consideration. Certain greater powers obtained from Doomstones are not silence immune, unlike birth sign powers. This means if you've been relying on a Doomstone greater power as your emergency, healing, or offensive option, a silence effect removes it entirely. Understanding which of your powers are immune and which aren't lets you triage your kit during debuffed combat, knowing what remains available and what you'll have to wait out before recovering. The reflect damage. Enchanting cap. Myth. Many players who build physical reflection characters stop at 50% reflect damage, having heard that the effect becomes less valuable in the upper ranges. This belief is incorrect, and following it costs you significant defensive power. There is no cap on reflect damage. The effect scales all the way to 100%, at which point every single point of physical damage dealt to you is mirrored back at the attacker. Stacking enchantments across 5 armor pieces to reach 100% means melee enemies are effectively fighting themselves every time they strike you. Each swing they land damages them identically to how it damages you before your armor mitigates the incoming portion. Fast attackers with multiple strikes per second kill themselves rapidly. Heavy hitters take their own enormous strikes back in full. The practical outcome is that at 100% reflect damage, the most aggressive melee enemies in the game become their own worst enemies. You simply need to survive long enough for them to drain their own health pools, which your armor and health sustain handle. The mythologized cap likely comes from confusing reflect damage with physical armor's 85% damage reduction cap, which is a real ceiling, or from anecdotal evidence of players who never stacked high enough to feel the true difference. Reaching 100% requires deliberate enchanting investment, but for a defensive mage who cannot wear heavy armor and needs an alternative survivability system, it's the most efficient path available. The quest item. Permanent effect glitch. When an enchanted quest item is forcibly removed from your inventory, such as at the completion of certain quests, the game removes the physical item, but sometimes fails to remove its enchantment effect. The enchantment stays active on your character permanently, for free, with no item taking up a slot. This is entirely unintended, but it produces some remarkable results for mages who know which quest items are candidates. The Draconian Madstone, available during the Thieves Guild questline in its pre-completion form, provides magical resistance effects that can persist permanently if timed correctly. The Necromancer's Amulet, obtained during the Mages Guild questline, carries both benefits and penalties, providing Fortify Conjuration and Fortify Intelligence, alongside weakness to magic and damaged endurance. For pure mage builds, the Intelligence and Conjuration boosts outweigh the drawbacks, making this one of the most powerful permanent free enchantments in the game despite the attached penalties. The key is understanding that these effects trigger when the quest forces item removal, not when you drop items manually. Deliberate exploitation requires knowing exactly which quests remove items from your inventory and which of those items carry enchantments worth keeping. It's a high-knowledge technique that rewards players who have read deeply into how the quest and inventory systems interact beneath the surface of normal gameplay. The spellmaking area of effect radius. Secret. Custom spells with area of effect components behave in ways the spellmaking interface never fully communicates, and the radius scaling has more nuance than simply making the number bigger and watching more enemies get hit. The magicka cost of area spells scales disproportionately with radius increases. Doubling the radius doesn't double the cost. It increases it far more steeply because the game calculates the volume of the affected sphere, not just the diameter. This means that modest radius spells are dramatically more cost-efficient per enemy hit than large radius versions, particularly in corridor-heavy dungeon environments where enemies are clustered in a line rather than spread in open space. The sweet spot for most builds is somewhere between 10 and 15 feet of radius. wide enough to catch multiple targets in most dungeon rooms, cheap enough to cast repeatedly without draining your pool in 2 or 3 casts. Beyond that radius, you're paying exponentially more magicka for coverage you usually don't need. There's also a behavior difference between on-target area spells and touch range area spells. Touch range area spells center on the point of contact, meaning if you touch an enemy directly, the blast is centered on them, and they receive the full effect before resistances. On-target projectile spells that miss the intended enemy, but hit a wall or floor near them, deal reduced splash damage to the target, making accuracy more important for on-target casters than many players realize. Building area spells with precision rather than maximum radius creates a more sustainable and effective offensive toolkit. The Drain attribute. Enemy weapon, break. Drain attribute, spells temporarily reduce enemy attributes, just as the same spells reduce yours. And while players are often on the receiving end of this effect from necromancers and traps, turning it offensively against melee enemies reveals a devastatingly efficient combat technique. Every weapon-wielding enemy depends on their strength and endurance to fight effectively. Cast Drain. Strength on a melee enemy and their damage output drops dramatically, their power attacks weaken, and their ability to stagger you decreases. Cast Drain endurance and their stamina depletes faster, reducing how long they can sustain aggressive offensive patterns. But here's the layer most players never explore. Drain luck affects all of their skills simultaneously. Every swing they take, every block they attempt, every action they perform degrades slightly across the board, because luck modifies everything in Oblivion. One well-placed Drain luck spell doesn't disable any single capability, but it degrades all of them simultaneously, turning a competent fighter into a slightly clumsy one across every dimension of combat. Stack Drain strength. With Drain luck and enemy melee threats become manageable at a fraction of the magicka cost you'd spend fighting them through raw health attrition. The technique is especially effective against Minotaur Lords and Ogres, whose primary threat comes from enormous single-strike damage values that Drain strength reduces to something survivable. The Apprentice Birth Sign offensive geometry. Being born under the Apprentice sign doubles your vulnerability to all magic, making every spell that hits you deal twice the damage it would to any other character. That sounds catastrophic, and for unprepared players, it absolutely is. But run the actual numbers on what the Apprentice Birth Sign provides offensively through spellcrafting access, and the picture changes dramatically. The Birth Sign grants access to weakness to magic as a spell-making effect, which means every custom spell you craft can begin with a weakness to magic component. When you open a spell with weakness to magic on touch and follow it with any damage effect, the damage is doubled. Stack 2 weakness to magic effects before the damage, and it quadruples. The Apprentice Mage with properly designed chain spells can deal staggering offensive output while managing their personal vulnerability through high magic resistance enchantments on their equipment. 2 items providing 50% resist magic. Each negate the entire weakness penalty while leaving the offensive access fully intact. The character you end up with receives no net benefit or penalty from magical damage, while hitting enemies with effects amplified several times over baseline, through a pathway only available to someone who chose a birth sign most guides call a trap. It's a deeply hidden piece of offensive design that rewards players willing to look past the obvious drawback on the character creation screen: the Ultima height speed advantage. This one sits at the intersection of magic and physical mechanics in a way that surprises most players who discover it. High Elves, the Ultima, are taller than all other races in Oblivion. This isn't just an aesthetic difference. character height directly affects base movement speed, and the taller the character, the faster they move at identical speed attribute values. An Altmer and an Imperial with the same speed stat will cover the same stretch of Cyrodiil in noticeably different amounts of time, with the Altmer arriving first without any additional investment. For pure Magicka builds that use the Altmer's enormous starting Magicka pool as their foundation, this hidden speed bonus provides a quality of life advantage across hundreds of hours of travel that compounds quietly in the background. The Magicka advantage is already well documented. Altmer Beginni with 100 bonus Magicka, the largest racial starting bonus in the game, making them the natural choice for first-time mage builds. The hidden movement speed bonus is the lesser-known counterpart, a passive advantage that makes them travel faster, kite enemies more effectively, and escape dangerous situations with greater ease than their stats on paper suggest. It doesn't require any spell investment or enchantment slots. It's simply present, a benefit of physiology that the game never surfaces in any tooltip or description, waiting for players curious enough to actually test whether two characters with identical stats feel different to move. The Necromancer's Amulet Mage Synergy. The Necromancer's Amulet is obtained during the Mages Guild questline, and at first glance its stat sheet seems to disqualify it from serious use by any character who isn't purely focused on dark magic. The amulet provides Fortify Conjuration 20, Fortify Intelligence 30, and Fortify Willpower 10. In the same breath, it inflicts weakness to magic 25% and damaged endurance 20. The conventional read is that the penalties make it a wash at best and a liability at worst. The mage's read is different. Fortify Intelligence 30 adds 60 points to your Magicka pool directly. Fortify Willpower 10 accelerates regeneration. Fortify Conjuration 20 reduces the cost of your entire conjuration school by a significant margin. The weakness to magic 25% is a genuine concern, but it's manageable through other gear. Damaged endurance 20 reduces your health gain from leveling, but doesn't affect current health unless you level while wearing it. For a mid-game mage who hasn't yet assembled a full enchanted gear set, the Necromancer's Amulet provides two of the most valuable mage stats in the game attached to a drawback that's patchable. The players who dismiss it miss a substantial power spike. The players who understand how to manage the weakness alongside the benefit discover one of the most impactful single accessories in the game's first half: the Alteration School's silent utility. Alteration is frequently treated as a utility school, a toolbox for travel convenience and situational problem solving, rather than a cornerstone of any serious magical build. And it's true that Alteration provides nothing in the way of direct offensive power. No damage, no crowd control that kills, no sustain. What it provides instead is freedom of action in a way that no other school replicates. Water walking allows positional dominance over any enemy who can't stand on water surfaces. Feather keeps you mobile at full carrying capacity. Shield provides damage mitigation that doesn't require armor investment. Open Lock removes the need for security skill. The quiet truth about Alteration is that each of its effects is a form of removing an obstacle between you and what you want to do. And the school as a whole functions as a layer of freedom that sits underneath every other build. A Destruction Mage with no Alteration investment constantly fights carrying weight, trap damage, lock barriers, and mobility restrictions. The same mage with even moderate Alteration investment handles all of those frictions passively, arriving at combat encounters in better condition with more inventory space and fewer hazards between them and the target. Alteration isn't flashy. It doesn't kill anything. but characters who invest in it spend less magicka compensating for problems and more magicka doing what they actually came to do, which is the closest thing to efficiency the game offers. The Destruction School late game fall-off. Destruction magic is the most popular offensive school in the game, the first thing new mage players invest in, and the foundation of almost every build labeled as a mage build. The school does exactly what it advertises through the early and middle stages of the game. Fireballs clear dungeon rooms, lightning chains through clusters, frost slows and chips. The problem emerges at higher levels, when enemies begin scaling in health and resistances in ways that flat damage numbers struggle to match. A 100 damage fireball that feels devastating at level 5 begins to feel anemic against a level 25 Dremora Lord with fire resistance and 600 health. This is Oblivion's infamous level scaling at its most punishing, and pure destruction builds feel it more acutely than any other archetype because their damage output doesn't scale the same way enemy health pools do. The solution isn't abandoning destruction, but understanding it through the weakness stacking framework. Raw damage numbers are a dead end at high levels. Weakness amplification is not, because the multiplier applies to whatever damage you deal, meaning your modest base damage becomes massive damage through proper setup regardless of level. Players who make this shift mid-game transform a struggling pure destruction mage into a consistently dominant one, carrying the same fundamental build through content that previously made them feel outmatched. The fall-off is real, but it's a design problem with a built-in design solution, one the game offers freely to anyone curious enough to ask why their fireball feels weaker. The Illusion School, NPC Permanence. Quirk: illusion spells that affect NPCs sometimes leave traces even after the spell expires, and the specific behavior depends on how deeply the NPC's AI reacted to the magical compulsion. Frenzy is the clearest example. When you frenzy an NPC and they attack a guard, the guard registers that attack as real aggression regardless of magical cause. The guard takes damage, observes the NPC as hostile, and maintains that hostility after the frenzy expires. The originally targeted NPC may return to normal disposition toward you, but the crime they committed while frenzied is still on the books. Guards who were attacked will still pursue them. Witnesses who saw them commit crimes still carry the memory. The same principle applies in reverse with calm. If you calm a hostile NPC and interact with them during the calm window, some quest-relevant NPCs will proceed with dialogue as though the confrontation never began, effectively resetting encounters that would otherwise require combat. This creates a tool for navigating quest states that seem locked. Frenzied NPCs who were supposed to survive for quest purposes can die from their compelled combat actions, breaking quest flags in ways that some players find liberating and others find catastrophic. Understanding how illusion spells interact with the persistent memory of Oblivion's AI moves the school from amusing crowd control into a genuine toolkit for shaping the world's social and political state. The scroll spell effect acquisition. Scrolls in Oblivion teach you things the game doesn't announce. When you use a scroll, the magical effect it contains becomes available to you at the altar of spellmaking, even if you don't know any spell that produces that effect. This is how players access certain rare or exclusive effects earlier than conventional progression allows. Several effects that aren't sold by any spell merchant anywhere in the game can be found on scrolls in dungeon loot, and the moment you activate one of those scrolls, you unlock the ability to build that effect into custom spells permanently. The Finger of the Mountain scroll found during a Mage's Guild quest provides access to an extraordinarily powerful shock damage effect that exists nowhere else in the game as a purchasable spell. use the scroll, and that effect opens in your spellmaking menu. Craft a custom version optimized for cost, and you've built one of the most damaging spells in the game from a one-time scroll activation. The same principle applies to rare restoration and mysticism effects that are intentionally kept out of normal vendor rotations to limit player access. Finding the right scroll and activating it rather than saving it creates permanent, expanded access to the spellmaking system. Players who hoard scrolls for emergencies miss this entirely, never realizing that the scroll was worth more as a one-time key to the altar than as a single-use spell in their pocket. The Finger of the Mountain acquisition. The Finger of the Mountain is arguably the most powerful spell in the base game, and it exists in a form that almost every player completely misses. During the Mages Guild questline, specifically the quest at Fort Ontus, you encounter a context where this legendary Ayleid spell comes within your reach. The scroll version of the spell deals shock damage in an area so large it clears entire rooms, with a magnitude that dwarfs anything purchasable from any merchant. Most players who complete the questline never realize they can take the scroll, use it, and then build a custom spell at the altar, using the now unlocked effect at a cost far lower than the scroll's single use. The scroll itself, if kept and activated strategically rather than used reactively in combat, becomes the foundation of the most devastating area, destruction build in the game. The Ultima Mage, with 1,200 magicka, who has assembled a Finger of the Mountain custom spell, with weakness stacking can clear Oblivion planes in seconds, outpacing even late-game enemies who scale in health, because the damage multiplies through weakness chains before any resistance calculation. It's the kind of payoff that makes the entire Mages Guild questline feel retroactively worth every tedious recommendation errand, because at the end of that path, there's a lightning storm waiting. The Restoration School overlooked combat role. Restoration is categorized as a support school, healing damage and curing ailments, and in most players' builds it sits in the background, cast reactively when health drops too low. The school's combat potential is almost entirely ignored, which is a shame because it contains some of the most precise forms of combat, control available. Damage fatigue does not harm health at all, but enemies at 0 fatigue collapse unconscious. Cast damage fatigue twice on any standard enemy, and they're on the ground, creating a guaranteed opening for follow-up attacks without any risk to yourself. Damage attribute effects from restoration permanently reduce enemy stats until cured, unlike Drain, which is temporary. An enemy with damage strength is weakened for the rest of the encounter, and the effect stacks with each cast. Damage intelligence from restoration can reduce an enemy mage to 0 magicka capacity, turning a dangerous spellcaster into a pedestrian who can only punch. None of these are labeled as offensive effects in the school's description, because restoration is framed around healing. But the damage family of effects is pure offense disguised as utility, creating a school that quietly handles crowd control, enemy debilitation, and outright shutdown of specific enemy archetypes. A mage who uses restoration offensively in addition to defensively plays with an entirely different understanding of what the school offers, and encounters that feel difficult through raw damage exchange become methodical and controlled through targeted debilitation. The Grand Soul Gem Value Differential. The difference between a filled Grand Soul Gem and a filled Black Soul Gem is one of the most important value distinctions in the entire enchanting system, and it's one that players often blur together because both are described as containing Grand Tier souls. Creature-based Grand Souls fill regular Grand Soul Gems. Human souls fill Black Soul Gems only. On paper, both provide the same soul strength for enchanting purposes, meaning the final enchantment power is identical regardless of which gem type you used. But the secondary value of Black Soul gems is that humans are abundant and easy to direct into specific death scenarios, while Grand-tier creatures are genuinely rare and difficult to farm efficiently at lower levels. A player who understands how to create Black Soul gems through the Necromancer's Moon process gains effectively unlimited access to Grand-tier enchanting materials from the most common enemy type in the game: bandits. Cyrodiil is full of bandits. Roads, camps, ruins, all of them host bandit spawns that reset over time. Once you're creating Black Soul gems regularly, every dungeon run doubles as a soul harvesting expedition, and your enchanting supply chain becomes self-sufficient in a way that pure creature hunting never allows. The moral implication is a deliberate design choice by Bethesda, one that forces you to actually confront the ethics of what you're doing in a way that killing monsters for enchanting materials doesn't. The weakness to magic duration extension. For effects that have no meaningful magnitude, specifically paralyze and silence, weakness to magic doesn't amplify their power in the way it amplifies damage. You can't make paralysis twice as strong because paralysis is binary. The target is either frozen or they aren't. What weakness to magic does instead for these magnitudeless effects is extend their duration. Cast weakness to magic on a target, then cast paralyze, and the paralysis lasts longer than it would without the weakness in place. This is a subtle but practically significant interaction because paralysis duration is often the limiting factor in how many follow-up actions you can complete before the target recovers. A paralyzed enemy that stays down for 3 seconds gives you time for 1 or 2 attacks. A paralyzed enemy that stays down for 8 seconds gives you time for a full combination, a weapon swap, a healing cast, and a repositioning. The same principle applies to silence against enemy mages. A longer silence window means a longer gap in their ability to cast healing or summon backup, changing the entire tempo of the encounter. The UESP documentation on weakness to magic explicitly confirms this duration behavior, making it verifiable rather than speculative. Designing spells around it transforms what looks like a redundant stacking combo into a precise timing tool for maximizing the value of your most powerful crowd control effects. The Mages Guild Arcane University access. The Arcane University is the most powerful location in all of Cyrodiil for any mage build, and the barrier between you and it isn't a level requirement or a combat challenge. It's a social one. To gain access, you must complete recommendation quests for every Mages Guild hall across the province, from Anvil to Cheydinhall, from Bruma to Leowin. These aren't difficult quests in isolation, but they require visiting every major city, completing miscellaneous tasks, and maintaining good standing with each chapter. Players who rush past them early miss not just the altar of spellmaking, but the altar of enchanting, both of which sit inside the university and are inaccessible any other way without finding alternative sigil stones. The process also teaches you the geography of Cyrodiil organically, leading you through every city in a natural circuit before opening the continent's most powerful magical resource. Once inside, the university provides everything a mage needs in one building: spellmaking, enchanting, alchemy equipment, a vendor for supplies, and master-level trainers for multiple schools. Nothing in the game matches its concentration of magical infrastructure. The recommendation process, which many players find tedious, is better understood as a long introduction to the world before handing you the tools to break it. Finishing those recommendations and stepping through the Arcane University gate for the first time has a specific feeling, the sense that everything before it was prologue. The magical school's major skill, trade-off. Choosing magic schools as major skills during character creation has an impact on your playthrough that extends far beyond the obvious benefit of starting with higher proficiency. In Oblivion, you level up by accumulating 10 skill increases across your major skills per level. If 5 of your 7 major skills are magic schools, you level up primarily by casting spells, and your level rises faster than your combat and survival skills keep pace. This creates a common trap where pure mage builds level up quickly during skill training sessions, then encounter enemies that have scaled to their level, while their health, armor, and non-magical capabilities remain underdeveloped. The enemies hit harder than the character can survive, despite the character having impressive magical abilities. The counter strategy is mixing only 2 or 3 major magic skills with non-magical major skills like blade, block, or heavy armor, creating a slower leveling pace that gives survival capabilities time to develop alongside magical ones. Alternatively, choosing alchemy as the sole magic major skill allows you to level it through crafting without ever casting a battle spell, keeping your level lower while building magical competency through exploration rather than combat. The interaction between major skill selection, level scaling, and magical power is the single most complex design space in Oblivion character creation, and players who understand it build characters who feel powerful throughout the entire game, rather than only during the early acts. The custom spell naming psychology. This last secret doesn't change a single number in your character sheet, and it provides no mechanical advantage whatsoever. But it changes something about how the game feels in a way that matters more than many players expect. When you create a custom spell at the altar of spellmaking, you name it. The name you give it appears every time you cast it, in the spell menu, in your active effects, in the combat log. Players who name their spells with care, something evocative, something that fits their character's story, and the spell's purpose, report that those spells feel more personal, more earned. The fireball you bought from a vendor is a tool. The spell you named yourself, the one you designed to match your specific build and then cast 100 times to master. The one with the name that means something to you becomes something closer to a character trait. This is Oblivion spell-making at its most humane. The entire system exists so that you can build magic that fits the mage you imagined, not just the mage the game provided. The naming step is the final acknowledgement of that design philosophy, a prompt asking you to claim ownership of what you've made. Many players rush past it with placeholder names. The ones who pause, who think about it, who write down something true about what the spell is and who cast it, those players are playing a slightly different game. And that difference is entirely invisible to anyone who never noticed it.